If there's one thing that a lot of Japanese learners say about learning Japanese, it's about how difficult it is. There are tens of thousands of kanji, some of which have many readings with seemingly no rules. Grammar structures are complex and so different from English and even other East Asian languages like Chinese, with the exception of Korean. Vocabulary and the way things are said in Japanese are so unique that it's not surprising for us to feel like learning Japanese is extremely difficult, if not impossible. This might be a hot take, but learning Japanese is not hard. Japanese is only as difficult as you believe it is, and with the right mindset and study techniques that work for you, learning Japanese can be a smooth, manageable process for anyone. That doesn't mean there won't be challenges along the way, but it doesn't have to take you years or decades to start speaking Japanese and be well on your way to mastery. And in this video, I'll be breaking down some common misconceptions about learning and speaking Japanese. So let's get right into it. The first thing I want to address is the idea that Japanese is harder than other East Asian languages, like Chinese or Korean. For English speakers, Japanese may initially seem more challenging because of its many writing systems, but other languages like Chinese have their own challenges, such as tonal pronunciation and an even larger number of kanji than Japanese. Mandarin has 4 tones, which can dramatically alter the meaning of a word depending on its pronunciation. For example, the sound ma in Mandarin can mean mother, ma, hemp, ma, horse, ma, or a question particle, ma, among many other things, depending on the tone. This tonal feature is often challenging for learners, especially those that come from non-tonal language backgrounds. Japanese, on the other hand, does not have tones in the same way. While Japanese has pitch accent, which affects the word meaning depending on the pitch, this is far simpler and much less complex than tones in Mandarin and other tonal languages. A simple mispronunciation in Mandarin can change a word entirely, while pitch accent in Japanese generally has fewer variations to worry about. Korean, on the other hand, has a simpler writing system, Hangul, but still has complex grammar. So Japanese isn't necessarily harder than other Asian languages, it simply presents different challenges. And this goes for any language out there, not just other Asian languages or Japanese. Each language will have its own unique challenges for you to overcome. It's important to remember that this is a very normal part of language learning and that it doesn't mean anything about you or your ability in the language. It's important to approach challenging concepts calmly and allow yourself the time and patience to grasp them. Sometimes, certain grammar or vocabulary might not sink in immediately, and all it needs is a little time and patience for your brain to form those new neural pathways in order for you to understand, remember, and apply what you've learned. Ultimately, the hardest language to learn is the one you approach without the right mindset. With the right resources and consistent practice, Japanese can be just as accessible as any other language. The next one is one that I've heard from a lot of people, and I've even thought to myself at times, and it's that kanji and grammar are notoriously difficult to grasp. However, and this might sound a little controversial, but kanji and grammar are only as difficult as long as you haven't started them, and are truly only as difficult as you believe them to be. I get a lot of comments saying things like, "Oh, but Chloe, Japanese is only easier for you because you can read Chinese." And yes, while I did grow up speaking Chinese, which by the way has a pretty negligible impact on speaking Japanese because phonetics work so differently in both languages, I did not always know how to read Chinese. I had to take the time to learn the basic characters and build a foundation of kanji knowledge. Then I started writing and learning more about them. I was born and raised in Australia. I have never studied in a Chinese-speaking country like China, Hong Kong, or Taiwan before. And basically, what I'm trying to say is, I was not in an environment where I would naturally just learn how to read and write kanji had I not put in the time and effort into building those skills, which I could then transfer towards learning Japanese. You'll find that once you know the basic foundational kanji, more difficult kanji is simply a combination of multiple smaller kanji, and if you can draw those connections, you'll have a much easier time learning to read and write. Learning kanji isn't something that should feel overwhelming, and today's sponsor, MochiKanji, makes learning Japanese straightforward and manageable. MochiKanji is a Japanese language learning app with so many built-in features that make learning Japanese a breeze. Spaced repetition is one of the most effective ways to learn a language, and MochiKanji employs this with their golden time feature. This will help you determine your best times to revise vocabulary for optimal memory retention. When your golden time is up, MochiKanji will send a notification to your phone to remind you that it's time to revise your vocabulary. Review lessons include activities such as listening, reading, and writing so that you can revise in a holistic, complete way. I love how this feature takes the confusion out of how and what you should be studying and makes learning Japanese an uncomplicated, streamlined process. With a special feature called the Digital Notebook, which organizes vocabulary you learn into one of 5 levels of memorization, with 1 being newly learned words and 5 being words stored in your long-term memory, which makes it easy to understand your level and progress so far. For those preparing for the JLPT, there are courses ranging from N5 to N2. Furthermore, there is a write feature that allows you to practice writing these kanji stroke by stroke. There are also courses for specialized areas such as IT and nursing, and if you're studying with the Minna no Nihongo or Genki series, there are courses that will support your learning alongside the textbooks. MochiKanji caters to such a wide range of levels and needs that no matter where you're at, you're bound to find something right for you. MochiKanji also has a handy dictionary feature which you can use to look up vocabulary, which you can then easily add to your digital notebook for further review. Learning Japanese doesn't need to be difficult or complicated. MochiKanji makes learning Japanese such an easy process because you can do almost anything within this app. The flashcard feature in MochiKanji also has furigana and audio, allowing you to listen for pitch, accent, and pronunciation, along with colorful visuals, which are great if you're a visual learner. Daily quizzes contain reading, listening, and writing, so that you can continue to improve in multiple aspects of the language without it feeling boring or repetitive. Besides fun little quizzes, MochiKanji has a conversation tab where you can practice conversation with Mochi. Aren't they just adorable? Here, you can practice talking about a variety of different topics, and they are a great way to improve your speaking. You can download the MochiKanji app via the App Store or Google Play Store, or visit their website if you're on PC. I also go into more detail about learning kanji in my kanji video, which I will link up here for you to watch later. As for Japanese grammar, again, the same thing applies. What I figured is you kind of need to approach it with an open mind and understand Japanese from the perspective of a Japanese speaker as opposed to an English speaker, or whatever your native language is. Let me explain what I mean by this. When you come across a new grammar structure, what you want to do is begin by breaking down and analyzing the different grammar rules it's combining and why it means what it does when it's put together in that certain way. For example, the grammar structure of a verb plus yo ni yotte wa means depending on how you do verb. Like depending on how you consider or think about something, we would take the verb kangaeru and do kangae yo ni yotte wa. If we break it down, we get yo, which means like the way something is, and when combined with the verb kangae yo, it would mean like the way someone thinks. And then we have ni yotte, which takes the verb yoru to depend on, with the directional particle ni, and all of that is in te form with the particle wa that marks all of that statement as the topic of the sentence. You don't need to think too much on this. However, when you start to have a general understanding of what the different elements of a grammar structure are, it'll make a lot more sense to you why they are used the way they are. The next misconception is that Japanese is an isolated language. That is, it's its own standalone language because it's so different from others like English, and that's what makes it so difficult to learn. While it's true that Japanese belongs to a different language family than English and has a large number of differences from even other East Asian languages like Chinese and Korean, Japanese is a language that draws a lot of influence from other languages. Arguably, the most obvious influence is from Chinese, with the use of kanji and Chinese loanwords, particularly when it comes to concepts related to philosophy, governance, and religion. However, even English is having a significant influence on Japanese these days, especially when it comes to pop culture, business, and technology. Japanese is a language saturated with loanwords from English, Chinese, French, and others, which form an essential part of the language. Many of these words are used on a regular basis, like terebi for television and konbini for convenience store. Japanese follows a subject-object-verb order, similar to Korean and Turkish. Japanese as a language has evolved through extensive contact with other cultures, borrowing and adapting vocabulary, grammar, and linguistic features, perhaps more than we even realize. While still vastly different, there are undeniable connections and similarities between Japanese and English, which are going to give you an easier time when you go to learn and understand them. The next thing I want to cover is that in order to visit or live in Japan, you need to speak perfect, fluent Japanese. And let me explain why this is simply not true. While being fluent is certainly a bonus and will help, it's not a necessity or a prerequisite to living in Japan. A decent conversational level is enough to navigate most things living in Japan, although a higher level will help you better deal with official documents and the intricacies of the workplace and daily life. Fluency is not something that people can typically achieve overnight. It takes a great deal of time and effort. Basically, your Japanese doesn't need to be perfect in order for you to start speaking. In fact, it's impossible to speak Japanese perfectly without actually doing the speaking. Language learning isn't going to be a pretty or clean process. You're going to make mistakes and fumble your words, and that's totally okay. Everybody does it. In fact, not just with Japanese, but even in our own native languages, we don't necessarily speak them perfectly. I talk more about speaking Japanese and improving your fluency in a previous video, which I will link up here for you to check out later. Speaking Japanese is a skill that anyone can learn, but not without the right mindset, because that's what's going to get you so much further in your learning than you may have once thought. The last thing I want to talk about is something that is unique to Japanese and can be confusing to even Japanese people at times, and that would be the use of keigo, or honorific speech. This is the language that you would use in formal professional settings when you're trying to speak up to someone. For example, a respectable figure like a company director, to express humility and respect towards them. While it can be confusing when to use keigo, you generally won't need it unless you're working in Japan. And keigo is much like kanji in that it's only difficult so long as you haven't begun studying it. Because once you do, you'll find that there are only a limited set of rules and honorific forms of mostly just the commonly used verbs. It might take some work getting used to this new way of speech, but once you realize that it's just the same verbs and phrases over and over again, you'll be able to grasp it in no time if you're open to learning. And that's going to be it for this video. If you ever felt like learning Japanese is impossible or that you'll never become fluent, I hope that this video was able to clear up some of those doubts and common misconceptions for you. Japanese is simply another language and is accessible to anyone who is willing to put in the time and effort into learning it. I think it's important to not put the language on a pedestal, so to say, where you're thinking it's something that is above yourself or that you're not good enough for any reason to attain it, if that makes sense. With that being said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment down below your thoughts, and subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!